Dr. Julie, it's a pleasure to have you on Create Like the Greats. I'm super excited for this conversation. Thank you for making the time. It's been a long time. I feel like we've been connected over the internet for quite some time. So having the chance to do this is truly a honor, and I'm looking forward to our chat today. I want to jump right into it. So I want to go back into time, and I want to go back into a little bit of your history. So I have a feeling, in a sense, from our years of being connected, that you have a connection to horses and ponies. And I need to know, like, did you grow up with horses? Were you on a farm? Like, where did that all come from? What is that?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. You and I have been connected forever, and I'm excited to kind of meet you in person. But yes, I grew up on a farm. It was a much different farm than I own today. Now I'm in kind of an older historic farmhouse in the country. When I grew up, it was a little self-sustaining farm, but I did grow up with ponies and horses and riding. So I thought, I would spend a lot of time out there in the city and doing some things and then come back and do it right. So my goal is really to create this kind of Martha Stewart-esque property that is less kind of traditional farm and more estate, and something I can make beautiful and for family, and to kind of really make something for generations to come. So that was my reason for kind of coming back to the farm, but I do have a very close connection to horses.
I love it. Tell me a bit about the farm that you're on now. So are you like, is it a farm in the sense that you're like growing things and like that you have animals, and like what's the farm today look like?
So the farm today looks like it's from the 1700s, so pretty old. We have a couple of barns on the property. We do have horses that are boarding here. And so, they're not my animals and I don't have to take care of them right now. So
Yeah.
that's not the phase in life I'm in right now.
Right.
But we do have horses. I can look out my window and see horses walking around. I have a kind of it's fairly large property. So I want to continue to kind of build that out, and also to make it a little bit more leisure. So I'm hoping to, put in a pool and do some things that are kind of nice as well outside of just being a farm. So it's much more of an equestrian property, I guess, than a traditional farm. I'm hoping to get a field of wildflowers out there so I can just go out and cut a few things and keep them in the house. But yeah, I mean, it's just a personal project, and I love this stuff. So it's kind of my passion outside of the work that I do.
Nice. I love it. So one more piece on this. So would you have said you grew up in like a rural area, like a country? Yeah. Cool.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I grew up in a very rural area in Western Pennsylvania. We had like I said, we did have a farm. My high school used to bus in kids from all over the place. So,
Cool.
my graduating class was about 1,000 kids, but it's because they really bussed in people from all over the place. And we spent an hour on that bus every morning. But yeah, my grandfather had a farm. And what's interesting is he bought his farm at about the same age I've purchased mine,
Nice.
and moved from, the suburbs, in his case, the city, mine, and ended up buying this property and making it something really wonderful for our family. And so I kind of hope to replicate that model today. And I think he'd be really excited if he were alive and around today.
I bet. That's so cool. Like a lot of my audience somehow have been people who come from like rural backgrounds or currently live in rural communities. I'd be curious, like working with highly successful executives, etc. Some of the listeners would be like early stage in their career. They're in the rural communities. They want to have a massive impact. They want to have a massive career. They want to do big things. What's some advice that you would give someone who lives in a rural community who's kind of like, this is tough. What do I do? Like, what would be your advice to someone who's in the rural side of things and trying to break out?
I think that there are a lot of opportunities when you're younger. I think it is beneficial oftentimes to put yourself in surroundings where you're with people who are more like you. And when you're in rural communities, oftentimes you have that sense when you look around that, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it, but a lot of people are really in a circle where they're reinforcing themselves on what they can do, what they should go for, who they are, what they should expect. Where I come from, it may have been expected that, you go and you work in a steel mill, and then, kind of that is really your life, and you buy a home, and that's it. And you may be in a similar situation if you're sitting at home where people have this kind of expected path, and in your heart that that kind of isn't the path for you. So being around people who are, kind of pursuing a similar path. Oftentimes you find it in urban areas, sometimes you don't, but it can be incredibly beneficial. If you don't have that, find a community, whether it's Twitter or it's, social media, and really hook up with people who are doing big things, think like you, and begin to kind of explore that path with them. Because otherwise, you're going to sit in a bunch of frustration for a very long time. So I do hope that people, the internet we are more connected than we ever have been. And so there's plenty of opportunity there. But there is something really magical sometimes about being able to go to lunch with somebody on a regular basis who's also kind of grinding it out and working hard and trying to build things and
Right.
supporting each other. That can be a really wonderful thing.
I love it. One of the things that's been fascinating about your journey is how much of a presence you've been able to build on some of these various social media channels, specifically Twitter. If you're not following Dr. Julie, definitely recommend that you do. And we'll include a link to your Twitter account in the show notes. When it came to social and like building your following, like what made you become such a like prolific tweeter and putting out so many bangers on Twitter? Like what sent you down that path and made you think, okay, I want to start creating great content on this platform? And what has been the impact of your presence there?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. Much like you, I have been on social media forever, and I feel like a war-torn veteran on social media at this point. Like we've gotten some bruises, you and I.
It's true.
Um, so for me, I do feel as though I just kept tweeting about the same things. I think it's really important that it's easy when you're first starting out to start to go down the path of whatever is early and reinforced. Like, oh, I see I got 5 likes on that. That's great. I'm going to keep talking about that. But
Yeah.
really what you want to do is choose maybe 3 things you're going to talk about and just talk about them all the time. And you think that people will get tired of it or bored of it, and they kind of won't. They're going to lock on to you because it's kind of their tribe. Like, this is the drum that they are beating to, and we're all going to find each other. And that
Yeah.
takes a long time. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think I've been on Twitter for 10 years. I mean, a decade. But in the past few years, people are more online. So I think that was easier to discover. I think also you can't be reticent to talk about what you're doing personally. I think I held myself back for a long time because I didn't want to seem like I was bragging, or I
Right.
didn't want to seem like, you're talking about yourself too much, or, what are people going to think? But if you look at people who are on social and who do well on social, they're often talking about themselves. They're not particularly humble people, and they really put it out there, and you do get some feedback for that.
Right.
But the other thing to realize is that feedback feeds the algorithm too. I mean,
True. Yeah.
so, you see people who make their entire career posting things that are maybe not positive.
Right.
So I try to be a force for good. I tweet things I genuinely believe and that I care about. I try to put a good energy out there, and I'm trying to be very consistent in my support of other people. And certainly we're not all perfect, but I want people in the comments to feel like they find community. I certainly appreciate having them in my community, and we all kind of like fuel each other together. And I feel like that has been what's helped the particular account to grow.
I love it. One of my all-time favorite tweets from you, I'm going to state it right out exactly what it was. It said, honestly, so many fortunes are built out of spite and proving people wrong. I wish we talked more about it. Don't be at peace with those people who didn't see your potential. Be an absolute monster. I read that and I was ready to run through a brick wall. Such a great tweet. Could you tell me a little bit more about this? Because I do think you're right that we don't talk about it enough. And I want to satisfy that wish and give you the space to talk about it a little bit more. So when you sent that tweet, and even when you reflect on it now, what inspired that? And what are your thoughts on that idea of kind of proving people wrong today?
I love that you asked this question because no one asks me about these kinds of tweets. I think they
Mm,
avoid them.
right.
And part of it is it proves this tweet out. And it is that, we all carry incredibly strong emotions, and we don't talk about them in polite society, right? Like we carry anger, we may carry rage, we may carry hurt or disappointment. And a lot of those things are injuries from what people think we could do, what people said our potential was, how
Right.
people have seen us in the past, something that people have said to us, and that most people will tell you, they'll say, oh, now, be nice, let
Right.
it go, all this, like put it away, right? So you're supposed to get that emotion is intense energy. It is powerful. It is strong. So if you're pushing that in like a little box somewhere, I feel like you're not really using it for its highest and best purpose, right?
Right.
Why push that energy downward and kind of clip your own wings when you can use it as fuel to kind of push? So to me, you use that stuff as push and you get bigger and stronger and you have it as fuel. And that's where you get like kind of that monster. That's where you
Mm,
get stronger.
right.
And that's where I see it can be purposeful. And you have to be, cautious, because energy like that can also be self-destructive, and you can burn your whole house down in rage and anger, or, do things that really damage yourself in that way. But channeled properly, there's really very little that can beat you if you can tap into that stuff. So I don't, I wrote a piece. You had mentioned my Substack earlier, but I
Yeah.
wrote a piece on Ultra Successful called Use It All. And it
Mm,
really taps into this point further, like where I want people to use everything they've got
right.
and make it serve you, instead
Mm,
of saying like, let's just push this down and leave it alone, because it's not like it's going away.
right.
It's just going to gnaw at you and make you weaker.
Right.
So that's kind of how I see that tweet.
I love
And
it.
it's a little bit longer than probably
Yeah.
the response that you wished for, but that's kind of
No,
how I see
that's great. It's interesting. I haven't shared this with many people, but I have a folder on my actual desktop, which is every rejection, every decline, every single person who ever like doted me. To many, it's like, all right, you're crazy. But I have that folder, and when I'm feeling like I'm not motivated, I open it up and I can just kill. I'm just able to just like unleash a whole different side of me when it comes to like getting things done. And so I really did appreciate that. For you, you've had some amazing success. Do you still reflect on people who you're trying to prove wrong, or like is that even something that fuels you at all?
I think about it as, like I come from rural America. I'm married to a woman. I took a path that was pretty untraditional.
Right.
There are certainly people who are not cheering for me to win out there. And I remember that I was in a graduate school class, and the professor was very frustrated because sometimes people can feel very entitled or what have you. He said, I want to go around the room and I want to ask you, what do you really think you all are going to make out
Mm,
there?
mm,
And most people were saying kind of normal salary bands, and they got to me and I said this massive number.
love it.
And he made fun of it. He literally ridiculed it in front of the entire class. And he
Wow.
said, who do you think you are? Like, where do you think you're going to make this money?
Wow.
And I said, I have a plan. I know what I'm going to do. And I'm going to make this happen for myself. I said, I'm not going to get into this debt, because it was a 6-figure debt, to kind of barely scrape by. I have big plans. I want to do big things, like, and so I didn't know how that would take its course.
Mm,
I thought it was going to be in forensics. It's where I started my path.
right.
But I think that professor is probably still there today, and I would love to meet him at some point in the future. I think that would be a wonderful, fortuitous meeting should we
True.
ever cross paths. But
Yeah.
I'm not seeking him out, but I do think about that from time to time, and it gives me deep satisfaction
I bet it
to have been able to achieve that.
Yeah, congrats on being able to do it. I also heard a quote from Josh Wolf, co-founder of Lux Capital, and I think you've seen this tweet as well. He always says, "Chips on shoulders, put chips in pockets." When you look at some of the people that you've worked with, like you work with some of the best executives in history, do those folks oftentimes have a chip on their shoulder as well? Like some of the people that you coach and that you've collaborated with over the years?
Yeah, I think that a lot do and a lot don't. So I
Mm,
have people who have really strong motivations for a number of reasons. Some of them come from poverty, some of them just because maybe they do have a chip on their shoulder and someone said certain things. Some of them have had pretty traumatic experiences. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons, but that chip is a push when it's there. The thing that I'm always really cautious about, though, is that sometimes the people who have chips who don't do well and end up self-destructing are the people I don't see. So
mm,
maybe
right.
those folks they could end up maybe addicted or having some other issues, and I wouldn't know it. So I never want to over leverage that
That
to
makes
say that it's always beneficial, but for the people that I work with, that is a small sample, it
right.
seems to be a great source of fuel for them.
One of the things that I love hearing about, I'm a big underdog cheerleader. Like I love rooting for the underdog. And you just mentioned like some people come from poverty and they've been able to break out and they've been able to be successful. Is there anything that you have seen in talking with folks who literally go from the mud from zero and are able to hit, let's say 80? Is there anything that shows up in those types of people that you feel more people who might be at the zero and might be struggling to get by should know about that journey and the things that they'll have to do to get out of it?
Yeah, I think that the few things that I've learned in people who've gone through that kind of transformation and are kind of self-built in that way is that they are unique and they are okay being outliers. Like they're okay being uniquely themselves. They're okay with the quirks that they have. And oftentimes they embrace those quirks because on your way up, you think about it, you have to live a life that is going to be different than your peers. Your peers are going to be going out and doing things. You're going to be building. It doesn't matter what stage you're at. Like if you're at a certain level and you just want to start out, maybe you got through high school and college and, now your friends are starting to get married and have families and they're spending every weekend doing X, Y, and Z. Maybe your weekend's on the computer and it seems really boring and, you're not going out to dinner and you're not going out with your friends. And a lot of times your life has to look different. Right. And so these are all people who are kind of okay with who they are. They've acknowledged who they are. And they really dig into that and they feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing. They don't feel a lot of pressure to be somebody they're not. And they're pretty certain on their path. And when I see them today, there's still people who believe that they have more in the tank and that they aren't done yet. And they're still a little quirky, right? So it's a great thing. And I applaud people like that because it does take a lot of overcoming people who tell you, who do you think you are? Or, remember where you come from or, all of those types of things that try to pull you back. If you know where you're destined to be or where you want to go, really put on those blinders and not let anything or anyone really distract you and make you feel like it's not something that's meant for you.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to go to another tweet that you had that I think does build on this as well, because over your course of your life, whether if you're striving for success, you're going to have a lot of people that you encounter. And one of the most important people that you might encounter is your actual partner. And you had this tweet where it said, ambitious people have two options: marry a supportive partner who knows and understands exactly what they're signing up for, or do not get married at all. Could you tell me a little bit more around the thought process behind this and why you really encourage that concept of supportive partner or just don't do it?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people can get married because it's the time to get married. They can get married for a lot of different reasons, right? But the person that you choose is to kind of marry and spend your life with is one of the most important decisions of your life. This person is going to determine not only a lot of your personal happiness, but they're going to determine a lot of your fiscal success, whether or not they often get credit for it. These are people who, when you need to work on something in your business, are either cheering you on or telling you, why do you have to do that tonight? Why can't you do this? So they're going to be people who maybe they don't want to move for an opportunity. So now like that's an issue. So there are little ways in which, you don't think about it now, but if that person isn't all in and you share a vision, you're going to really struggle. And it's going to be the little things that you're going to be kind of tempted to give and take on. That's going to be challenging. One of the things that I hope that people think about as they move forward is that dating is not the day to day. And so you want to be sure that you're giving people the honest take about what you want your life to look like. Because sometimes what I find is that people are dating someone and they'll say, oh, he or she wants to build a business. And they assume that this is like 2 or 3 years and then life is normal. And what they realize is that, hey, like very quickly, they're not just 2 or 3 years. Like this is your life. And if you're not all in, you are going to find that there's some real challenges. So being forthright, just kind of being straightforward. And even if the romance begins in a wonderful way, letting them know that, my day to day is really 12 hours working on my work. Then I do X, then I do Y. And just being upfront about it so people know what they're engaging in. And I do think that if you are ambitious, it is far better to pair with somebody upfront who wants you to win and wants to support that vision or be a part of it or has their own, rather than get yourself in a situation where now, not only do you risk losing half your net worth, but like you do have, long-standing entanglements that then could be challenges on the way forward.
Makes sense. If you were to give someone advice who's still in the early stages, they haven't gotten married yet, what are the traits that they should be looking for in the partner to kind of understand, okay, is this person going to be right for me? Like, is there anything that they should be striving to seek out in terms of that perfect partner?
I think that we hear oftentimes that, opposites attract, but what we know from research is that similarities stay together. So you want somebody who is as similar to you in kind of almost any variable you can think of. So somebody who shares your values, someone who shares your financial values, somebody, because your notion of what is success, right? If I were to ask you, you're going to have a different definition than someone else, than somebody else, than maybe me. And there's nothing wrong with any of those definitions, but you
Mm.
should both be kind of on the same page, striving to an endpoint. And the values along the way are important. So, is it really true for you that, your spouse is over your work? That,
Right.
like, is it true for you? Maybe you value your faith over any of those things. So, like, these things are really, really important. I also think you have to think about dating, and as you're kind of sifting through potential partners, marrying a whole person who is
Mm.
mature, not
Right.
somebody who like plays games, somebody who doesn't know what they want, someone who's ghosting you. Like,
Right.
get a mature person who knows what they want.
Right.
Kindness, I'm a big fan of. Openness, I'm a big fan of. Having like as many helpfulness, green flags as you can, and being thoughtful about this, because even though your feelings will put you in a certain place, I mean, this is the most important decision you're going to make. So make it with your head as well as your heart, and really look for traits that are going to be compatible for you and somebody you're going to have a great time with as you go through life
Yeah.
and explore this world ahead.
I love it. That's awesome. With some of the folks that you've seen thrive in both their career and in their personal life,
Yeah.
for that individual, the person who's ambitious, hungry, is trying to build something that's big and has a lasting impact, what are things that you've seen or maybe have caught from them as things that they do to be able to maintain a strong relationship while also having a strong and successful career?
So these are individuals who are intentional. They
Mm.
have to make it a priority and put time into it. And they know that just like their business, if they pay no attention to it, it's going to fail.
Right.
And so they make a deliberate effort to have things like date nights. They
Right.
shut off at a certain point. They may have certain rituals in the morning, like, hey, we have coffee every morning from 6 to 7. There may
Right.
be certain things, but they are always doing small things to make sure there are touch points and they're nurturing it, because their
Right.
tendency, I think they're very aware that their tendency is to become immersed in what they do. And while
Mm.
that's great for building and it's really good to be that focused, it also, as much as you focus in, you're also blocking out.
Right.
And it's easy to block out like the text message, the touch points, the things that make people feel loved or important,
Right.
because you're so in the zone. And people can interpret that as I don't matter, but the real interpretation is oftentimes, they're kind of distracted or singularly focused. And so it's important to make an intentional conversation, intentional touch points. I had one guy who did this really great thing that I love. He wasn't a client, but a gentleman that I spoke with. And he
Yeah.
said, every day I make a note card and I say on it, how can I be the best husband I can be today, the best father I can be today, and the best CEO I can be today? And just one thing, right? So
Mm.
maybe a husband, it's I'm going to call my wife at lunch, or I'm going to
Right.
send her a lovely text. For
Right.
their kid, maybe it's we'll go out to ice cream later or play video game with them. And for the CEO, they'll have one thing that makes them outstanding in their profession. I'm going to give some really positive feedback to my executive who really won a great deal over the weekend. So
Right.
I think that the intentionality is the thing that's the same with all of them.
Mm, I love that. One of the pieces that you did write in your newsletter was around the idea of having no plan B. And to me, that screams intention. Like if you have plan A and you're intentionally chasing that, there's really no question that you're going to be relentless in putting all around it. Could you give me and share with the listeners just a little bit more around that idea of having no plan B and what you meant in that and what it means to you?
Sure. When we have a plan B, it's usually because we have a fallback. And a fallbacks are meant for, like, I call it cognitive outs, right? Like
Mm.
these are ways when a cognitive out is that you have something in the back of your mind where I always have this, right?
Right.
And so when things get really hard, if you have this thing that's really close to you, the temptation is often going to be when things get really hard to say, well, why am I putting up with this? Why am
Right.
I doing this when I can just go back and do X? And so you don't want to really leave cognitive outs for yourself, but you do want to assess and protect against downside. So by
Right.
that, I mean, I don't think people should quit their job and have no money in the bank and say, no
Right.
plan B, let's go.
Right.
I think that's wild.
That is
But,
wild.
but you can have, 6 months of expenses or a year in the bank,
Right.
and then say, look, I'm going to make a real run at doing something different. And if I am not making income,
Yeah.
3 months before the year is up, I'm going to start looking for a job in earnest.
Right.
That's a very different position than somebody who says, well, I'm going to stay part-time. Like I'm going to do this and I'm going to, I told my employer that I might be back in 3 months. So he's holding a position for me and I'm going to see
Right.
what happens. That person is the temptation to go back to something easy. Comfort is where we all fall down. And so you're setting yourself up to possibly fall down if things are really easy, because the hard things are what make kind of the other side of the hard things, are where some of the things start to get good. And you never get to see it if you don't kind of trudge through it. It's all the content, like, for example, that people make that never gets seen before the content actually gets seen. You've got to go through that. So it can be easy. Like, I don't know how long you were making content before you became as big as you are, but if you're putting content out there, at first, nobody looks,
You
nobody cares.
watched. Yeah, it's been a
Yeah,
long time. I can remember my first pieces. They would get a like from my mom and maybe my buddy Marcus, but like that was it. There was not a lot of traction on the content, but you just have to kind of keep putting in the reps. And I can remember it being very uncomfortable to even share the content because all of my friends were like, we were just young, early in our careers, not even in careers. Like we were sharing content about what we were doing on the weekend. Nobody was sharing things about business. And I was this weird kid sharing stuff about business. Everybody's like, what's going on? So you mentioned there in your statement, you said comfort is where a lot of us fall. And doing things that are uncomfortable can be very difficult for people. Could you just elaborate on that idea of like comfort is where a lot of us fall? What does that mean?
I think, one of the things that I've said in the past is like, oftentimes as we're moving forward, it feels like some of these things can feel like a nice warm blanket. You run back to what you know. And all of us do that sometimes under stress. We run back to what we know. But when we're doing it, getting through comfort and getting into discomfort, I always ask people to piece out what is creating the discomfort for you, like name it, because
Right.
then you can address it when things are vague, and that's when they get overwhelming. So if you say, look, I just hate putting content out there because nobody likes it. Well, what do you hate about it? Is it, I feel like no one sees it. I feel like it's a waste of time. I feel like people are, ridiculing me. I feel like name it, because once you name it, you can address the thing that's actually causing the discomfort and kind of call yourself out on some of the BS a little bit. Like if it's, you're putting yourself out there and you feel uncomfortable, is it because, look, I don't get any lights, other people do, and now I'm comparing, right? Like,
Right.
so are you comparing to somebody who has been doing this to 10 years and you just started? Are you comparing yourself to somebody who is like kind of starting from a different line? Are you like, so what's that about? And do you care about that enough to stop? So I always think when things get uncomfortable, is it really worth sacrificing the end goal to not be uncomfortable today? And we
Mm,
see people like Gary V or Gary Vaynerchuk, who, now is really over a bit of an empire, but he
right.
starts out pairing candy with wines and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the most ridiculous videos ever. And I'm sure now he doesn't go, oh, those videos were masterful. And
Right.
they're not our best work. And maybe it's good that it's like that. Like that sometimes our worst work gets to not be seen by a lot of people, and our
Right.
better work up front really gets the attention. But we all have to go through it. And there is nobody who starts out on expert level.
True.
Most people are starting on novice, and we're all figuring it out initially. So give yourself a little grace and an ability to become an expert by doing the things it requires.
Yeah, I tell folks all the time, I'm like, Beyonce didn't start as Beyonce. Like at some
No.
point, she was a 4-year-old kid learning how to sing. And then over time, with practice and putting in the work and staying committed and showing up for choir practice, blah, 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 she became Beyonce. But it took a lot of years. And a lot of people don't realize that or even think about that. And something that I've also noticed that I'd be curious to get your take on is like the idea of hard work is something that online tends to get a bad rep sometimes. There's a bit of a backlash against things like hustle and grind, and people are not really about that topic anymore. But you still tell people you got to work hard, and you don't like step down when people are saying like no, 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 you don't work, you shouldn't work hard, blah blah blah. What are your thoughts on the backlash against working hard right now on the internet?
I find it really curious that people want to opt out of the things that are essential to building anything great. There is really no one I know or that I've ever met with who, like, for example, I'll meet with professional athletes. They don't say, I felt a little lazy these past couple years. So I watched a lot of Netflix and then I decided, hey, maybe the Cowboys are interested in me. Like, you have to really do,
Right.
the hard work, and you have to put in things that are tough and sometimes hurt and are grinding. So it's odd to me that people want to opt out of that process and yet expect the rewards that come with going through that process. And sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect that when you're seeing somebody, it's kind of like even fitness. I'll tell people that as much as you see people who are very fit online who seem to be doing great things, that a lot of my clients actually struggle with fitness a long time. And then once their companies are doing well is when they start thinking about fitness
Right.
because they haven't had the time. And sometimes there are health impacts and those things are a reality sometimes. And I don't advocate for that.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that I don't know of anyone I have worked with across the spectrum who could not tell you stories about long hours, hard work, like having struggles with just being tired and
Mm,
having times when they've gone through that, feeling
right.
discouraged to get to the other side. And now they're not there. I mean, in the initial stages, I think people forget that, or maybe don't know, that the way in which growth should happen ideally is that you do all the work at first. And
Right.
then as you move forward, you begin to piece things out, right? You're pulling things out of that so that you could start doing higher leverage things. And then you're piecing more out. And then you're doing kind of higher leverage things. And eventually, when people start to see you have nice cars or you live in a nice place, you're piecing out all of the kind of the more grinding work and people
Right.
go, look, see, this person doesn't work that hard, but they have for the last decade. And now they're finally able to have more flexibility in their life. And it's not that they're not working. They often are doing now different types of work that don't look like work.
Mm,
So an example would be like sometimes I'll have like a large real estate developer or someone as a client. Now, a large part of their work is raising money or having meetings that are forming relationships or flying out to do golf with somebody to form
right.
get an investment. That golf game could be $1 million golf game if it gets an investment. High leverage, really important. But I'm sure that the people who are doing financial modeling would look at him and say, yeah, you're not really doing the work, my man. So work looks different over time.
Yeah, it's true. The high leverage versus low leverage, I think that's an interesting concept that also is not really spoken to too often. Could you get a little specific on like what's the difference between low leverage and high leverage and the types of tasks that operate at those different types of levels?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's working when you're talking about lower leverage things, they're often things that need to get done, but are not really pushing the business forward. It's kind of in maintaining the business.
Mm,
So, for example, maybe a lower leverage task for somebody who's in your seat or has your particular expertise is if you, Ross, are doing every calendar management for yourself. That might be a lower leverage task. That can
right.
be done by somebody else who's really great at it and probably more efficient than you are.
Right.
And then you can be strategizing and planning content, which is probably much more effective for your business. I mean, you need great ideas. You
Yeah.
need to be able to think about how to execute those ideas, and you need to think about how you're going to distribute or whatever it is that you're going
Yeah,
to do. I'm not an expert in your field.
for
So
sure.
you're thinking about all those things. Can you really be strategic and creative if you're trying to fit it in like the 2 minutes between your meetings and
Mm,
all of the scheduling that you have to do?
right.
Probably not. But
Right.
you having these great ideas, having somebody else who's great at scheduling help you,
Right.
now you're in high leverage work and the effectiveness of what you do gets better and better. It helps your business move forward and it ends up getting you more helping your business get more popularity and certainly more resources.
Yeah. What does hard work even look like for someone? Like some people, I don't know if they can even define what hard work means. When you say you do have to work hard, what does that mean? If I work my 40 hours, am I working hard? Is that sufficient? 30 hours a week? Like what's sufficient for me to be a hard worker?
I think it depends on what phase you're at and what you're doing, right? I
Mm,
mean, the hardest probably I've ever worked is as a waitress. So I can tell you
right.
that,
Right.
what I do today is pretty easy comparative to being like physical labor and
Right.
work. Not that it's easy, but there's working hard and like physically and there's working hard cognitively. So I do think that it depends on what phase you're at. So, in your career, if you want to get ahead, I think that if you're just working kind of the same hours as everyone else and doing what everyone else does, you're probably going to get the results that everyone else gets.
Mhm.
So I would try to measure it I'm somebody who really values people who go outside of what's typically expected because that's where you get better results. The same can be said for like monocultures, which I think happens a lot in professions. You're a marketer, you have marketing following on Twitter, you're in marketing forums, you go to marketing conferences, you watch marketing videos, and like Where are all your ideas going to come from? Where are
Right.
you going to be unique? You're surrounded by the same. So
Right.
I feel that way with work as well. If you're just a lot of my work, which is for me, I think kind of interesting,
Right.
is that I follow people who don't do anything like what I do. I
Right.
want to hear from artists,
Yep.
investors. I want real estate folks. I want to hear from people in tech. I
Yep.
want folks from all backgrounds. I want to know kind of where I can draw ideas and inspiration. And I'm not going to find that if I'm just in a whole room full of coaches and we're all talking about coaching things. That feels like an echo chamber. So if you're working hard, make sure that you're doing work that is not common work. And I
Mm.
think that's where you get kind of uncommon results. You start applying things from outside of your field into it
Right.
and doing novel things.
When you're coaching folks, what do you see as some of the biggest blocks to get them from their to the next level? So on average, there's always a next level for
Yeah.
almost everyone. What's a common block that you see your clients running into that you have to kind of coach them through to get to the other side?
I think a common block is that people get to a certain level and they believe that like they know inherent like they're frustrated, right? I think frustration is the most common thing that I will encounter when people are doing really well, right? You're running if your company is worth like $400 million, you
Yep.
can tell other people like, yeah, I'm really frustrated. I know I can be doing more. And they're like, you're doing fine. Like, go
Right.
away. But for them, I think that there's not a lot of peers. There's
Mm.
not a lot of people who are going to mentor you. There's
Right.
nobody who really understands the blockers that's happening there. So it's something, it's never skills, right? It never is skills. It is always something internal to them. Skills they have, if you've gotten to a certain level, you are a self-learner and you will learn any skill you need to know. But it is something internal that is preventing you from doing this next thing, whatever it is. And usually if I ask them what a next level look like, they all know. They will tell you what it looks like. And so then we start to say, look, if I say, hey, what's the next level look like? And they know what this would look like, then we start to say, well, why aren't you doing this? Here we
Right.
start to hear some of the things that are interfering. Well, we had really solid profitability and I don't want to push too much on X, or oh, well, we think that we can do Y. And this person, maybe there's an executive who, is kind of lower risk and really
Right.
doesn't want to take those moves right now. The economy is a little X. So we start kind of feeling out where those hesitations are. And that's where we really start to dig in. And it's going to be different for everyone, but it's never skills. It's always you. And if the vision is there, I'm going to ask you why it's not happening. And that's where we're going to start to get into some of the pain points. And
Right.
sometimes it is that like maybe there's an executive that is a really good friend, has been with you on some of the journey. And it's hard to say that isn't the right person for the seat. So there's a lot of different ways in which people get stuck or hold back the progress of their own business. And it's really kind of my job to call some of those things out and to have some real discussions around those things.
When it comes to the emotional side of business, like getting people to remove the emotion and think purely from a logical sense, that's a big, big shift. Yeah, like how do you approach that with an executive where they're like emotionally driven by a commitment, a sunk cost, etc., and you see it because you're a third party, but they don't see it. How do you coach them through that type of an environment?
I try to pull it away from the individual entirely and make it about something that we can both agree is objective, like metrics. I
Right.
try to make it look like, because let's just say that there's an executive that's underperforming and you feel very strong, like you like this person. They come in, you chat in your office, you have a good
Right.
rapport. So we start to look at that. And then usually I'll ask them something like, what would an ideal person in this role look like?
Right.
Oh, and then they have all these ideas. And I say, well, tell me a little bit about how this person lines up to that. Oh, like it's
Interesting.
it's
Right.
heartbreaking, right? I mean,
Right.
and so I try to pull it into as much as I can areas where we can have objective conversations and measurements so that these individuals or, the things that are emotional have the opportunity to show themselves out in a new way that isn't. And then we can address it there. I'm not going to try to tell someone not to care or not to be emotional about something or to call them
Right.
out on that. But
Yeah.
what I am going to do is try to create a different framework for examining the same information so that
Right.
they can look at it more objectively.
I love that framework. Describe the ideal person, all of the things that they would do in this role. And now let's talk about the person who's in there. Are there any other frameworks and cheat sheets that you have in your mind that you've applied that you think executives and leaders should be thinking about? Is there any that come to mind that you can say, oh, this is something else that we've done that works well?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that people try to avoid, no matter what level they're at, are really hard conversations, right? It feels very conflict. It feels very me versus you. And
Right.
so, one of the frameworks that I really like is, instead of making it me versus you, I try to help them pull that person to your side of the table and make it like you both versus a problem, so you can talk about the problems. It
Right.
doesn't feel adversarial. So, for example, let's just say it's marketing. I don't know why I'm thinking about marketing today, but
Maybe
let's
just
just say,
talk to the marketing guy, maybe. I
yeah.
don't know.
So maybe it's marketing, and you go and you know that like Ted's department is really falling short. He's just really behind. So you pull him, you kind of want to meet with him. He comes in, you say, hey, Ted, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the department. So it's we're talking together, we're
Right.
facing a problem together. Ted comes in, we can have that conversation. Like, what's happening? What's going on? And then he can start to kind of talk about it. But if Ted comes in and I say, your department sucks. Why
Mm,
aren't you hitting your numbers? This has been happening for a long time. Don't you have control over your department? Like, and
defense.
that's, yeah, and that's what happens, right? The other thing that happens as a secondary consequence is that that person is never coming to you when there's problems that they see.
Right.
Never. They're going to try to figure it out. They're going to try to gloss over it somehow. And you
Right.
will only see it when it is catastrophic and terrible. So
Mm,
you want to have people who feel comfortable talking with you about nuances and challenges, because then you'll hear about them early and they'll see you as a thought partner. But if
right.
you wait until these things are, you're blaming, you're punitive, people are going to hide from that because they don't want conflict either. And that's going to set you up for not knowing really what's happening in your business until it's too late.
Right. For a leader who might be in a situation where they've already caused harm and they feel like people won't come to them with those types of problems and solutions, what should they do? What do they need to do to fix the culture that in some ways they even broke?
I would have, when you're one to ones, and hopefully they're having one to one conversations, I think I would have a really candid discussion about, because you should be in your one to ones at least talking about where people are at, how
Right.
they're doing, what challenges they have, and if you can unblock them in any way. So if things are struggling, it's a good opportunity to have a conversation to say, what are the challenges in your department right now? Like let's talk about some of those. So again, not me versus you, it's kind of us versus the problem.
Right.
And really opening, like allowing them space to talk about the challenges that they feel, the
Right.
people in their department that might be hard, and not making sure that you provide a solid experience for them at that time. Because if they open up and you shut them down, or you instantly attack because something triggers you, which it
Right.
might, that's going to just reinforce a bad pattern. So you always get what you reinforce. If you are, and you can change that at any time, and people won't shift right away, but then they start to believe you over time. Consistency is the thing that always builds trust. If they
You're
know you're the same person again and again and again. I mean, think about when you were a kid in a class and you would watch kids approach the teacher, and the teacher was like kind and nice. And you're like, okay, if I have a question, I can ask like Mrs. Cernus or whoever it is. But if you watch the kid approach the teacher and they really like got a lashing, or you watch sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're not, that lack of consistency or that punitive model, you're not approaching that teacher anytime soon. And the same is true. It's odd, but we're like the same people who learn in the same ways.
right. You get what you reinforce. How do you create a culture that like really embodies that, in your opinion? Like, what does the leader need to do to create an environment where their team even knows like this is the types of things that we want to reinforce and be trying to kind of commit to with our.
So culture always starts at the top. And I feel like the person who is at the top, it's their responsibility to communicate what they value and to demonstrate that over and over and over again. So I don't know about you, but when I went to workplaces, I would see the culture that they said they had, and then I would experience the culture they actually had.
Right.
And oftentimes those are like very, very different. And what do you play to? You play to the culture that's actually there and not the one that they say. So I would say, if you want to create a culture, let's just say that you value agency, right? Like self initiative and agency. You should be talking about agency in your all hands. You should be reinforcing agency in your one to ones. You should be, when you're promoting someone in front of others, say, Diane really exemplifies agency. She
Right.
is like taking initiative on these three things. You're going to sound to yourself like, I am a robot. I am so repetitive, but people need to hear it more than once.
Right.
And you want them to predict you. Like when you come in the room, you want them to go, oh my gosh, have I taken initiative on this because he's going to care about agency? And then that creates that culture because you look for it, they know to expect it, you're reinforcing it, you talk about it all the time, you reward it. I
Mm.
mean, you find these things to drill down on and you just keep going over and over again. It feels repetitive, but it makes a difference.
That makes sense. If a leader is trying to figure out, like, okay, that is what I want to do, but I don't really know which values I should be emphasizing at once, is there anything that you would advise them to start with? Like, is there any frameworks or approach that you would advise for them to think through before they kind of say, okay, this is what I want to, where I want to go with this?
Sure. I think that people can begin to think about what are the common traits that you would want your employees to have? Do you
Mm.
want them to have traits of, like, for example, bias to action? I want all of us to be a bias to action. Do
Right.
you want the employees in your organization to have a commitment to the mission? Do you
Right.
want people like so starting to think about what is the common thread that you want to see? And then being able to reinforce those things and not making it too complicated. Sometimes people say we have 18 values, and
Right.
then I'll do a 360. Sometimes I'll do those, and I'll go in and I'll ask someone. It's always an interesting experiment. Can you name the 18 values?
Right.
And they'll usually say, "Well, I think that trust is one of them,"
Right.
and like no one knows what that is. So like I mean, there you have to make sure that they're things that you reinforce that can stick and the people can remember. Otherwise, they don't mean anything.
Yeah, no, that's fair. One of the things that I've learned a lot from reading your pieces over the years is the idea of not always striving to be like a people pleaser. As a Canadian, I tend to have a bit of a problem with trying to keep people happy, and I've tried to shake myself out of it. But how do you coach folks to get out of that behavior when, in many cases, even society kind of like encourages you to keep everyone happy and not really get people upset at you? Like, how do you coach people on getting out of that people pleasing mindset?
We tend to take things to extremes in culture. So we'll say either you're a people pleaser or you don't care what anyone thinks, right? Like and I feel like telling someone who's naturally a people pleaser that you shouldn't care what anyone thinks is not going to be very effective.
Right.
So, the way in which I think about this is that I want you to tell me who the people matter, who are the people that do matter,
Mm-hmm.
what they think about what you're doing or who you are, and really kind of name them to yourself. And usually it might be your spouse, it might be your child, it might be a parent, but there are very few people whose opinions really matter in your life. And you don't want to not care what anyone thinks, or you end up being a jerk, right? I mean, you're not a really pleasant person. So you do want to care what some people think, but those people are few and far between. And
Mm.
even with those individuals, you start to run opinions through a filter, right?
Right.
Does this person, is this from someone I value? Or do they want the best for me? Or are they saying these things out of fear or security?
Right.
Is this something that makes sense to me? So you have a small group of people you do care about their
Mm.
opinions. And then even with that group, you run it through a bit of a filter and you don't always have to care about every opinion,
Right.
but these are people you should weight heavily, that you should care about, and are people that matter to you. So you keep those people happy and you do your best, and it keeps your home front and friend front in a good place.
One of the most ultra successful people who have clearly been able to care very little about what other people think and has been ridiculously successful is Chris Jenner. And I've heard you call out Chris Jenner's
Yeah.
success in the past because Chris Jenner has been a business mastermind for a while now. But a lot of people give hate to like Chris Jenner and the empire that her and the family have built. I'd be curious to get a sense from you, like, what are your thoughts on what she's built and the empire, and like even how people respond to kind of Chris Jenner's empire, so to speak.
It is. She's a fantastic example of some of this because, she comes, people think about her as coming from privilege, but she was an airline stewardess, like, which is wild, right? So she was an airline stewardess at one point. She had a
Right.
children's clothing shop, I believe, at one point.
Cool.
And yet, Ryan Seacrest, I think, called her the most shrewd negotiator he's ever met.
Mm.
She talks about her story as like sitting in rooms and listening and paying attention. And then, when she needed to operate, not being hesitant to just go after the yes. She said, you got to know you're talking to the wrong person, just keep pushing. I think that her architecture of multiple billion-dollar companies is
Right.
something that you have to respect. And
Right.
we see that with personalities oftentimes that are not always as fluffy and pleasant as we might hope them to be. But at the same time, I think that she knows what she wanted. She went after it relentlessly. She has a family that she's kept together and has been able to support. She is as astute as they get. She's not a young person, and
Yeah.
she's able to kind of construct an empire in a very modern world. Again, multiple billion-dollar companies, multiple hundreds of millions of dollars in company ventures, and also while locking tight really important family wealth and also family reputation. You will never see a piece out there that's a hit piece on the Kardashians. People may say things in social media,
Right.
but she is ruthless when it comes to protecting her reputation.
Right.
And somebody who I think is a great example of somebody who has done it their own way, who kind of doesn't come from as privileged a background as you might think, and
Right.
has really built from zero to an incredible amount. So we don't hear her mentioned with all these things. So I always mention her because I think she's kind of left out on purpose.
Yeah.
I'm the first to plug her in.
I appreciate it. I 100% agree. You brought up family with that convo. We also brought up family early on, talking about how your grandfather had a farm, etc. With a lot of the people that you even coach, like how much of a factor is family wealth, family legacy in some of the minds of the people that you work with and the people that you collaborate with on a regular basis?
It's massive for those who have families. I think that creating something that outlives them, that takes care of them, is incredibly important.
Mm.
So, like there are many people that I work with, and sometimes people say, well, why are they still working? Right? Like you can sell your company and be wealthy for the rest of your life. But I think that they're thinking about a few things. One is, what can I really do? I think that's always a driver. But also they're trying to think about family legacy from not just this particular family, but generations and generations onward. And they're setting up, obviously they set up trusts and other kind of mechanisms. But I think that that element of knowing that no matter how much you've struggled, and, we talked about grind and, living your life in this different way, their children don't have to do that at a certain point. And I think it's a real point of pride for them to be
Mm.
able to provide that. I think it's also a point of agitation because sometimes when kids seem entitled, I think it bothers them at a level that it probably doesn't bother other people.
Right.
But it really is a point of pride where they say, I've had clients who said things like, I never thought my kid would go to a private school
Right.
that costs whatever, or like, oh, my kids have never flown commercial. It's like a really kind of cool, interesting thing that we can look at and say, oh, it's so entitled and terrible. But
Right.
for that person, being able to provide that is something that they take great pride in. And I think the great individuals oftentimes also put in things that kind of keep those kids grounded. When I lived in Connecticut, I lived next to a guy who did VC in he's a European VC. And his young son, who's like 14, would go house to house and say, do you have any chores? Because I want to buy a Jeep. And my dad is making me buy it cash. He's not going to pay for it. So he would do things like stack wood for people and, shovel their driveways. And he's like, you got to go and earn this. I'm not giving you 1 cent. But does he have a financial advantage? Absolutely. He's going to teach him how to manage money and what to do. But I do think it's good that some people make their kids kind of stay in touch with the fact that not everyone is going to grow up exactly like you.
Right. And it comes again back to intention, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's like the same with your relationship with your partner. You have to be intentional with your career, intentional even with the kids. If that's something that you have to be intentional with. When it came to being a coach and going down that path, was that intentional? What took you into this world?
Yeah, it wasn't at all. So I think that I started out in psychology very traditionally. My area of focus was adult psychopathology and forensics. So I started out in a forensic track, thinking that I would end up doing things like, I did some testifying. I did evaluations for mental state at the time of the crime, which then qualifies someone for the insanity defense. So doing all of those sorts of things is where I really thought I was going to be heading. I ended up doing, psychology very traditionally. I ended up doing some academic work. And, I also had a great expertise in personality and personality theory. And so periodically I would teach that and do some of those other things. So, sometimes you have companies that approach you to advise on products when you're in academics or you have a certain area of expertise. And I was advising a company. I had done so a few times, and I was doing that work. And one of the venture firm folks said, hey, we have a founder in our portfolio who's really struggling with making decisions. He just got a lot of financial infusion, and now he's paralyzed. Could you just talk to him?
Right.
And I thought, okay, I think I was the only psychologist that they knew. So they kind of had me go and speak with this guy. I had a few meetings with him, and then he was kind of back on track. And
Right.
they were like, okay, we have other things we have to do. So I began to see, though, when I met with him, the first time I met with him, it was very, very clear to me what his challenge was.
Mm,
And as somebody who had worked from like illness to health, getting
right.
somebody who was completely healthy but just had these minor tweaks, they were
Mm,
easier to spot.
right.
And I felt like, wow, this is fantastic. Like, I loved it. It was something that, like, immediately I felt like was hand in glove. I can do this. I'm good at it. I
Right.
felt like this was a real gift that I could bring forward. And so from that point forward, I started to gather some clients. I had one company that had a really significant exit. I started getting a really good reputation in the space.
Right.
And then I was like off to the races. I love what I do, and I will do it until I die. So when you see like who's that like 90-year-old woman who's still talking these posts, it's probably going to be me, but I absolutely love it.
I love it. That's amazing. When it came to like once you started on this path, did you find other coaches that could mentor you, or were you like self-taught and just learning as you went?
Business has always been a part of my life for a number of reasons. You know, my significant others in business, and I have a lot of friends who are in kind of that space and tech and some other things. So yeah, it wasn't anybody who mentored me, and I think I've made a lot of early mistakes around how I developed out my business. You know, you don't really know what you know until you know it, and so I think I was just feeling my way out and trying to figure things out along the way. I didn't know that coaching was a real thing, but I felt like what I had to do very early on is to kind of distinguish myself from other people who probably were in a similar area of operation. And so I really dug into the fact that, you know, my background in clinical psychology, it's 8 years of study. And a lot of people, my expertise is on the person. So
Right.
you can be an expert in a number of different fields, but my expertise is kind of on the human. And so I
Mm,
tend to get people who they know that there's a challenge, and much like they'd hire an engineer for a software issue, they hire me for a human one. And so that's kind of how I've been able to operate in this very unique space within psychology, whether it's, you know, an athlete or a CEO, there's something within them that
right.
I'm able to find and identify.
That's awesome. For folks that are looking for a coach, what should they know before they start their journey to decide, okay, I think I do need a coach? What should they be thinking about when they're about to make that decision?
Personally, I would recommend that they think about what they need them for, because
Mhm.
every coach is going to have a sweet spot of operation that they're great at and things that they're not great at. For
Right.
example, like I don't work with teams, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
I'm not going to be somebody who's going to tell you how to structure your business. I'm probably not going to be that person. So, you know, a lot of times early on, maybe a founder wants somebody who, like, hey, can you help me like structure my term sheet? No, I
Mm,
cannot. Do you want somebody who can, you know, vet my, you know, certain people in my organization? Also not my sweet spot. So I think that if you're looking for something specific, find somebody who is really good at that thing and start interviewing a few people in that area or that space. For
right.
me, I have, you know, I joke all the time at home. I have one thing, I do one thing well, and that's all I know how to do well. And
Right.
everything else, I'm sure other people are very, very good at. So I operate only where I'm good and I feel like I'm really solid. And everything else, I hope that people are doing that too. And that's what I would look for. If I were asking, you know, a good friend asked me how to hire a coach, I would say, know what you need, find the
Mm,
person who's done that thing 1,000 times and is really good at it,
right.
and hire that person.
I love it. One last question, and then we'll go into the question that I typically end with. But
Sure.
you've been able to build an amazing network. You live on a farm. You've been able to leverage Twitter in an amazing way. For folks that want to expand their network, to connect with some of the most impressive people, people who have high net worth, what would you give them as advice? Like, should they go down the path of embracing social media to kind of build a personal brand and do that? Like, what would you advise folks to do if they're trying to kind of get in the room with some of these people?
I think it's a very hard space to get into, honestly. And I don't think Twitter gets you in that room unless you're looking to get into someone who has built a high net worth through social media. I
Yeah.
don't think social media is going to get you in that door. I think, in fact, it would make you very suspicious because it looks like you're about to use somebody. But
Right.
my biggest clients are not on social media, to be
I
frank.
love this. I love
So,
this.
I mean, the way in which you often meet people is through other people. So do
Right.
your job, do it well. You never know who you're going to be in touch with. And how you get into circles like that is through personal referral because
Right.
those circles are very protected. And
Right.
they want people who they can trust, that they know are going to be reliable, that aren't going to be using them, and that have their best interest at heart. It used to be, I would have to sign all these NDAs and there was all this stuff to protect people. And now I maybe have signed one in the past year, right? Like I rarely sign them because they know that my business is reliant on the fact that I operate in a certain fashion. And so be that person that does a great job, does it for whomever you come, that you come across. And eventually people will start to refer you into other networks and just continue to do that great job. Be reliable, be somebody who's genuinely like authentic about it, and don't ever use it. Like you'll never see me taking a photo with somebody who is a client and saying, "Hey, at the game," like that's
Right.
never going to happen. But the reason why it's never going to happen is because, you want to be the person that others can trust. And so that's what I guess that's and you'll continue to scale and do well because people will continue to refer you because everybody knows someone who is a few levels up from them. And
Mm.
so they want to be a good referral partner. So, I maybe met with this VC firm, and then VC firms will connect you to investors, and then and so and then investors oftentimes know other investors who then know investors who are higher level than them, and so there's all sorts of ways in which you start to branch out,
Right.
but just do a great job and be of service and really take it seriously.
I love that. Thank you so much. So as we wrap, this is what we do with every folks. They kind of have to finish the sentence. So before I became a coach, I wish I would have known blank.
How much need there actually was, and I should have done it earlier.
Mm, that's awesome. And in order to be a great coach, I have learned that the most important skill to work on is
Self-development. Like I have to always be learning myself. To be great for other people, I have to make sure that I am always not only just like I spend an hour a day reading journals and other things and constructing different models, but not only do I have to be on top of my game, but I have to be taking care of myself. Like I have to be sleeping. I should be bringing my A game to the table because if I'm not, then they're not paying for the experience that they should have and the person that they signed up to engage with. So I think that you need to really heavily invest in yourself and not skimp on that. Because I think when you're building something, that's the first area that gets cut is the things you do for yourself. Make it a priority.
love it. Dr. Julie Gurner, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It has been an absolute blast. Folks, if you haven't already subscribed to the Ultra Successful Substack, I strongly encourage you to check it out, drgurner.substack.com, as well as follow Dr. Julie at Dr. Gurner on Twitter and all the other channels. Dr. Julie, thank you so much for making the time. This has been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, it's been great chatting with you today.
Wonderful being here. Great to meet you in person. You're fantastic.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. See you on the internet.
If you want to know how to create like the grades, let's break it down.